Hello, everyone. I wanted to read some passages to you from this book, The Complete Mystical Works of Meister Eckhart, beautifully translated by Maurice Walsh. And I'm going to read some passages from his first sermon, which are particularly pertinent at Christmas. Here in time, we are celebrating the eternal birth. When he says here in time, he means here on Christmas Day. Here in time, we are celebrating the eternal birth which God the Father bore and bears unceasingly in eternity, because this same birth is now born in time, in human nature. So these beautiful opening words really sum up the entire Christmas message, that the eternal birth, the eternal presence of God's being, which shines in each of us as the knowledge I am, but which is obscured by the content of experience and seems as a result to be missing. And it is for this reason that the eternal, that God's divine being seems to need to be reborn in us, because we have overlooked its presence in ourself as our very self. So Meister Eckhart is suggesting here on Christmas Day, we are celebrating the eternal presence of God, which is now born, although God's presence is eternal. Christmas Day represents its birth in us, in time. Here in time, on Christmas Day, we are celebrating the eternal birth which God the Father bore and bears unceasingly in eternity, because this same birth is now born in time, in human nature. Our human nature, which is personal and limited, but into our human nature, the birth of the impersonal divine presence is born, and in which it shines. He then goes on, there is a saying of the wise man, when all things lay in the midst of silence, then there descended down into me from on high, from the royal throne, a secret word. This secret word is the Logos. When all things lay in the midst of silence, he gives a hint here of what is required of us if this secret word is to be spoken to us, this state of openness, receptivity, silence. And he says that it descended down into me from on high, from the royal throne, a secret word, when all things lay in the midst of silence. Then there descended down into me from on high, from the royal throne, a secret word. And then he goes on to say what is necessary for each of us for this secret word to be spoken to us. The soul in which this birth is to take place, the soul is the 14th century word for what we would call mind. The soul in which this birth is to take place must keep absolutely pure and must live in noble fashion, quite collected and turned entirely inward, not running out through the five senses into the multiplicity of creatures, but all interned and collected and in the purest part. There is his place. So here he's He's suggesting that our minds are normally turned outward through the five senses into the multiplicity and diversity of what he calls creatures, objects, and things. And he's suggesting that the mind must turn around, and instead of running out through the faculties of seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling into the world, it must, so to speak, turn around. And as he says, it must be all interned and collected in the purest part. There is his place, the purest part, that part of the mind that is still untouched by experience, the fact of simply being or being aware. So he's really teaching his students what those of us familiar with the Vedantic tradition would know as self-inquiry or self-abidance, this turning around of the mind, the mind turning away from the content of its experience and coming back sinking back into its essence. And then he is questioned, where is this silence? And where is the place where the word is spoken? And Meister Eckhart replies, as I said just now, it is in the purest thing that the soul is capable of, in the noblest part, the ground of being, the fact of simply being or being aware, the very ground of our essential self. In the noblest part, the ground, indeed, in the very essence of the soul, which is the soul's most secret part, the very essence of the mind, that part of the mind that is still untouched by experience, the fact of simply being or being aware. There is the silent middle, for no creature ever entered there, and no image, nor has the soul there either activity or understanding. Therefore, she is not aware there of any images, whether of herself or of any other creature. Meister Eckhart here conceives the soul or the mind as feminine, and God the Father or Godhead as masculine. It was the tradition of the day. But he speaks of it in this way because he speaks of the God the Father entering into the ground of the soul. There is the silent middle, for no creature ever entered there, and no image, nor has the soul there any activity or understanding. Therefore she is not aware there of any image, whether of herself or of any other creature. So he depicts the soul as being the soul before it is touched by experience, before experience has risen within it, as just a ground, a field of openness, of receptivity, into which the divine word is spoken, or into which the divine word is received. And then he goes on to distinguish between the faculties of the mind, thinking, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling, which he calls her powers, and the essence of the mind, the ground of being. Whatever the soul affects, she affects with her powers. Whatever the mind accomplishes, it does so through its faculties of thinking, seeing, hearing, touching, and so on. Whatever she understands with the intellect. Whatever she remembers with memory. If she would love, she does that with the will. And thus she works with her powers or faculties and not with her essence. Her essence does no work. The ground of being does nothing. It is silent, motionless, still. The mind accomplishes its activities with what he calls her powers, her faculties. Every external act that the mind is engaged in is linked with some kinds of means, seeing, hearing, touching, and so on. The power of sight works only through the eyes. Otherwise it can neither employ nor bestow vision. And so it is with all other senses. The power of sight works only through the eyes. Otherwise it can neither employ nor bestow vision. And so it is with all the other senses. The soul's every external act is effected by some means, but in the soul's essence, there is no activity. For the powers she works with emanate from the ground of being. But in the soul's essence, in the ground of being, the fact of simply being or being aware, there is no activity there, and yet the faculties of the mind emanate from this ground of being. Yet in that ground is the silent middle. Here, nothing but rest and celebration for this birth, this act, that God the Father may speak his word there. For this part is by nature receptive to nothing save only the divine essence without mediation. Here, God enters the soul with his all, not merely a part. God enters here the ground of the soul. None can touch the ground of the soul but God alone. No creature can enter the soul's ground, but must stop outside in the powers, the faculties of thinking, perceiving, must remain outside. They cannot enter the ground of being where God enters the soul all alone. And then he goes on. And you must know too that inwardly the soul is free and void of all means and all images, which is why God can freely unite with her without form or likeness. God has no need of image and has no image. Without any means, likeness, or image, God operates in the soul, right in the ground where no image ever got in, but only he himself with his own being. This no creature can do. And then he's questioned, Meister Eckhart is again questioned, presumably by one of his students or disciples attending his talk, his sermon. This is one of his sermons. And Meister Eckhart replies, now see, God the Father has a perfect insight into himself, profound and thorough knowledge of himself by himself, and not through any image. And thus God the Father gives birth to his Son in the true unity of the divine nature. See, it is like this, and in no other way, that God the Father gives birth to the Son in the ground and essence of the soul, and thus unites himself with her. For if any image were present, there would be no real union. And in that real union lies the soul's whole beatitude. And then he goes on to say that the one requisite for the soul, for the mind, that is for each of us, for God to speak the silent word within, for the I am, God's presence, to shine within each of our minds as the essence of each of our minds. Therefore, Meister Eckhart goes on, therefore, you have to be and dwell in the essence and in the ground. And there, God will touch you with his simple essence, without the intervention of any image. No image represents and signifies itself. It always aims and points to that of which it is the image. And since you have no image, but of what is outside of yourself, that is, what is drawn in through the senses, and continually points to that of which it is the image. Therefore, it is impossible for you to be beatified by any image whatsoever. And therefore, there must be a silence and a stillness, and the Father must speak in that, and give birth to his Son, and perform his works free from all images. So this is the essence of the Christian message from Meister Eckhart, from this complete mystical works of Meister Eckhart, beautifully translated by Maurice Walsh. And just to return to the beginning again, really the essence of this sermon. Here in time, on Christmas Day, we are celebrating the eternal birth, which God the Father bore and bears unceasingly in eternity, because this same birth is now born in time, in human nature. So today, on Christmas Day, I wish that the eternal birth, which God's infinite being bears unceasingly in eternity, shines in each of us as individual people in time, and that God's own being shines as our very own being. Here in time, we are celebrating the eternal birth, which God the Father bore and bears unceasingly in eternity, because this same birth is now born in time, in human nature. Thank you. God bless. Bye.